Welcome back for another deep dive. You know we love getting into the nitty-gritty of all sorts of fascinating topics. And today, we are diving headfirst into the world of Generation Z in America. We've got a treasure trove of research, surveys, and expert opinions to sift through. But this isn't just about throwing statistics at you. We really want to paint a picture of their lived experiences and potential futures of this generation. I think you'll be surprised by some of what we found. One thing that really blew my mind was that by 2030, a staggering 375 million workers might need to switch careers because of automation. It's a crazy number. And right in the thick of it is Gen Z.
It really is fascinating to consider. I mean, Gen Z is entering a world unlike any generation before them. And if we're going to even try to understand the future of our country, well, we need to grapple with the unique challenges this generation is up against.
Totally agree. And speaking of challenges, a lot of the research we've been looking at paints a pretty stark picture of the economic realities for Gen Z. So, let's start with the elephant in the room, shall we? The rising cost of living. I mean, how are they supposed to get ahead when just paying rent is eating up most of their paycheck? It's a serious problem. Like, I read this article about a Gen Z worker in New York. She was juggling 2 jobs just to make rent. Imagine that, having barely anything left for groceries or other essentials after paying rent.
It's a harsh reality for so many. Economists call this cost-burdened renters, basically people who are shelling out more than 30% of their income just on housing. And then trying to save for a down payment on top of that. It's just not feasible for many, especially with housing prices through the roof. Wages are not keeping up. Homeownership just feels like a pipe dream.
Yeah, it does feel that way. And on top of that, there's this mountain of student loan debt. Did you know? The Federal Reserve reported that total student loan debt has blown past, get this, $1.7 trillion.
Yeah, it's a crazy amount of debt. And the ripple effects are huge. Think about it. One person I speak to said they were so overwhelmed by student loan payments that buying a house or starting a family felt completely out of reach. It's a major burden, one that's really pushing back those major life decisions, and ultimately affecting everything from when people start families to their overall economic mobility.
It's almost like they're starting the race with this massive weight chained to their ankles.
Yeah.
But
What I don't get is, why have college costs gotten so out of control? Is this just like regular inflation, or is there something else going on?
it's a really complex issue.
Yeah.
Most experts say it's a combination of factors, like universities getting more and more expensive to run, state funding for public schools drying up, and this kind of like surge in demand for college degrees,
Well,
almost like this keeping up with the Joneses thing.
so we've got this vicious cycle where tuition costs explode, which leads to these insane levels of debt, making it even harder to afford basic living expenses. So, how does all this impact Gen Z when it comes to starting their careers? Right. So that brings us to a really interesting part of all this, what I call the experience paradox. It's this constant refrain you hear. Employers want experience, even for entry-level jobs. But how are they supposed to get that experience if no one is willing to give them a chance?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's that whole catch-22. Like, you need experience, but you can't get experience unless we hire you. It's kind of maddening.
Totally. And it's here that we really see this disconnect between traditional education and what the job market actually needs.
What do you mean by disconnect?
Well, a lot of universities are still focused on providing a strong theoretical background, which is important, don't get me wrong. But, employers are increasingly looking for graduates who have practical skills like communication, teamwork, problem solving, those soft skills.
Right. So it's not just about what you know, but how you use that knowledge in the real world.
Exactly. And this gap is only getting bigger. With technology evolving so rapidly, you could learn a skill in college, and it could be obsolete by the time you graduate. It's like trying to hit a moving target.
That's a great analogy. It makes me wonder, is the traditional 4-year college degree even the right path anymore? For everyone. I mean,
That's a huge question, and there's not really an easy answer, but it definitely raises some important points about the value of higher education and, whether there are other paths to success.
absolutely. And you know what else is interesting? This generation is incredibly tech savvy, but there's this real lack of practical financial literacy, managing your finances, investing wisely. These are essential life skills, no matter what you do for a living.
Couldn't agree more. And the scary part is that very few states actually require personal finance courses in high school. So many young people are going out into the world totally unprepared to deal with the complexities of finances.
Right, that sets them up for a lot of stress down the line.
Absolutely. And this lack of financial literacy, it's especially worrisome when you consider how many Gen Zers are interested in entrepreneurship, starting a business. It requires a whole different set of financial skills than a traditional career.
So it's not just about getting a job anymore. It's about being equipped to thrive in this constantly changing economic landscape.
You got it. And that brings us to another challenge that often gets overlooked, but it's so important. Discrimination in the workplace. It's a sobering reminder that even with a more diverse workforce than ever, these age-old biases are still there.
Yeah. It's a big takeaway for the research. This isn't just an issue of the past. Gen Z is facing discrimination in a lot of different ways. They're being dismissed as too young or inexperienced, or facing barriers based on their race or gender.
Exactly. And those biases have real-world consequences. Fewer promotions, lower salaries, not to mention the constant microaggressions that just wear them down.
I'm curious, what exactly are microaggressions? I hear that term a lot, but I'm not sure I fully understand it.
Sure, microaggressions are these subtle but really harmful forms of discrimination. Like, imagine constantly being mistaken for an intern because you look young, or having your ideas dismissed in meetings because you're a woman in a male-dominated field. These seemingly small slights, they add up, and they create a toxic work environment.
Wow, I hadn't thought about it like that. It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. You might not notice each individual cut, but the cumulative effect is brutal.
Exactly. And the impact on mental health can be really significant. We're seeing that in the rising rates of anxiety and depression among young people. It's not just typical teenage angst. Gen Z is dealing with a whole different set of pressures that are really taking a toll on their well-being. It's deeper than that, I think. I mean, just think about it. They're constantly bombarded with these messages about success and achievement. And this pressure to project this perfect image online, it can be exhausting.
It really can, sometimes. It feels like everyone on social media is living their best life.
Yeah.
I'm just over here trying to keep my head above water. It's easy to get sucked into those comparisons.
Absolutely. And that constant pressure to perform, to be on all the time, it takes a toll. You add that to the academic pressures and the financial worries we talked about and the uncertainties of the job market. It's a recipe for stress and burnout.
Yeah. It makes sense that so many young people are struggling. I was reading about this Gen Z student who was juggling a full course load with a part-time job and internships, all while trying to maintain a perfect GPA and a killer social media presence. It's like they're expected to do it all and do it perfectly.
Right. It's such a clear example of the impossible standards so many young people feel pressured to meet. And it's just not sustainable. It leads to burnout, decreased productivity, higher turnover rates, a whole host of problems.
It sounds like burnout isn't just an individual problem then, it's a societal issue.
Exactly, and the research backs that up. Burnout is becoming increasingly common among Gen Z, impacting their mental health, their work, their relationships.
So what can we do about it? How do we change the culture so that it values well-being and doesn't equate self-worth with constant achievement?
That's the big question, right? I think it starts with open and honest conversations about mental health. Taking the stigma away from therapy and counseling and creating workplaces that actually prioritize employee well-being.
Totally.
Yeah.
We need to shift away from this hustle culture, create environments where it's okay to admit you're struggling and ask for help.
Exactly. We need to encourage young people to prioritize their mental health and recognize that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
It's about changing that whole mindset.
Yeah.
It's not just about individual actions. We need systemic change, too, like access to affordable mental health services. It shouldn't be a luxury to take care of your mental health.
I completely agree. Access to mental health care, it's a fundamental right.
Absolutely. Speaking of fundamental needs, I want to circle back to financial literacy for a minute. It's clear that this is a huge area where Gen Z could use more support. We talked about the lack of personal finance education in schools. So where can young people go to learn these essential skills?
That's a really important question. Ideally, personal finance would be a required part of the high school curriculum. But until then, there are other options, There are some great online resources out there, apps that make managing money fun and engaging, and even workshops and community programs specifically designed for young adults.
Oh, yeah. I've seen some of those financial literacy apps. They're pretty cool. It's like they've gamified personal finance, which I think could be a really effective way to reach Gen Z.
Totally. It's all about meeting them where they are, using technology and creative approaches to make financial education accessible and, dare I say, enjoyable.
Yeah, it's about giving them the tools.
To have
Take
the-
control of their financial future.
Exactly. And that financial empowerment, it's so crucial for their overall well-being. It impacts their ability to achieve other goals, like buying a home, starting a business, or even just having the financial freedom to pursue their passions.
You know, after diving deep into all these challenges, it would be easy to feel pessimistic.
About Gen Z's prospects. But honestly, I'm feeling pretty optimistic. This generation, they're resilient, resourceful, and they're not afraid to challenge the status quo.
I'm right there with you. Gen Z is the most diverse generation in American history. They're digital natives, they're entrepreneurial, and they're passionate about social justice. They're not just inheriting the future, they're actively shaping it.
And they're doing it while facing some pretty serious obstacles.
You said it. And that's why it's so important that we really understand their struggles and not just sympathize, but figure out how we can support them and create a world where they can thrive. Their success is our success. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, I think we've covered a ton of ground today. From the crushing weight of student loan debt to the experience paradox in the job market, the persistence of discrimination, the mental health crisis, and the need for greater financial literacy. It's been a real journey. It really has been. I mean, it's easy to get bogged down in all the negative stuff. But I think it's important to remember, every generation faces unique challenges. And Gen Z, they've got this fighting spirit. They're not just sitting back and complaining. They're actively trying to change things.
Yeah. I'm constantly impressed by their activism, their commitment to making the world a better place. They're not afraid to call out injustice, whether it's climate change, racial justice, economic inequality. They're holding us accountable, and that's a good thing.
It is. They're pushing us to do better. Which makes me think, okay, we've talked about all these obstacles they're facing, but what does the future actually hold for Gen Z? What kind of possibilities do you see coming out of all this upheaval?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? One possibility is that their struggles actually lead to real systemic change. I mean, they're already pushing for reforms in education, healthcare, the workplace. They want systems that are more sustainable, more equitable.
Right, and I'm seeing that in their career choices, too. They're not just going for those traditional corporate jobs.
Yeah.
They're starting their own businesses.
Right.
Embracing the gig economy, finding new ways to make a living that actually align with their values.
Absolutely. They're redefining success. It's not just about climbing the corporate ladder anymore. It's about finding work that's meaningful, flexible, work that lets them make a difference.
So, are you saying that Gen Z's struggles could actually be a catalyst for positive change, not just for themselves, but for society as a whole?
I think it's definitely possible. They're forcing us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the way things are, and sometimes discomfort can lead to innovation, new solutions, a better future for everyone.
That's a pretty hopeful way to look at it. It makes you realize that even in the midst of challenges, there's this incredible potential for growth.
Exactly. And I think the key takeaway here is that we can't just sit back and watch. We need to be active participants in creating a world where they can thrive.
I couldn't agree more. It's not just about understanding their struggles. It's about finding ways to support them, empower them, help them make their voices heard.
It's about recognizing that their success is our success.
Well said. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We explored the economic pressures, the challenges of the workplace, the mental health struggles, and the lack of financial literacy that Gen Z is facing. But we also saw their resilience, their creativity, and their unwavering commitment to building a better world.
And at the end of the day, it's that spirit of hope and determination that gives me the most optimism. If we equip them with the tools and support they need, I have no doubt that Gen Z will create a world that's more equitable, more sustainable, more just for everyone. It's up to all of us to help them get there.
I couldn't agree more. And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. On this deep dive into the world of Generation Z, we've only just scratched the surface. But we hope this conversation has given you some new insights and maybe even inspired you to think about how you can support this generation on their journey. What resonated with you the most? What questions do you still have? We encourage you to keep exploring this topic and continue the conversation. Until next time, keep diving deep.